Hello, my name is Dr. Andrea Maffetano. It is my honor to serve as Dean of the MSU College of Osteopathic Medicine and to welcome you tonight. On behalf of the MSU College of Osteopathic Medicine, I'd like to welcome you to the 21st Annual Dr. William G. Anderson Lecture Series, Slavery to Freedom, an American Odyssey. Things are obviously a little different this year due to COVID-19 pandemics. We were forced to have this series virtually. However, this series is perhaps more relevant this year than ever before. The dialogues that occur as a part of the series foster important historical and cultural reflections about the contributions of African Americans in this country to the osteopathic medical profession as well as the greater medical profession. I'd like to begin by extending our gratitude to the numerous sponsors who have helped make this year's series possible. From the many MSU College and unit sponsors to the community organizations and the corporate sponsors from the College of Osteopathic Medicine statewide campus system, this is truly a collaborative and team event. The complete list of sponsors is in your program. We hope you'll make a point to acknowledge them for helping us bring these thought-provoking speakers to East Lansing and our lecture series. They've always been there for us, and they're always going to be there going forward. As many of you know, Dr. William G. Anderson led our college in establishing this lecture series. Dr. Anderson, his wife Norma, Martin Luther King Jr., and Ralph Abernathy were integral in the Albany movement, one of the most important civil rights struggles in the United States. Nearly 20 years ago, Dr. Anderson shared a vision for what this series could be, and he's been at the core of helping us bring outstanding speakers since 2000. It's only fitting that his name be forever connected to this legacy. So in 2014, we dedicated these presentations as the Dr. William G. Anderson Lecture Series, Slavery to Freedom. We are indebted to Dr. Anderson for his sacrifices during the civil rights movement, as a trailblazer in the osteopathic medical profession, and for his efforts and passion to make Slavery to Freedom a distinguished series and model others seek to follow. Following in that legacy, I also want to highlight our new Associate Dean of Diversity and Campus Inclusion, Dr. Marita Gilbert. Dr. Gilbert and her team are working tirelessly to assist not only MSU College of Osteopathic Medicine, but the greater university in becoming places of inclusive excellence. And we thank her for those ongoing efforts. I, like you, am excited to hear from each of our presenters today. More importantly, I'm eager to incorporate the lessons learned, not only into my daily efforts, but also the practices of our college and university, together making all of our communities stronger. Leading the university's efforts to do just that is our newly appointed Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Jabbar Bennett. Welcome, Dr. Bennett. We are glad for your support.
Greetings. My name is Jabbar Bennett, and I serve as Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer here at Michigan State University. I am also a professor of medicine in the College of Human Medicine here at MSU. It is truly my pleasure to welcome you to the 21st Annual Dr. William G. Anderson Lecture Series, sponsored by the College of Osteopathic Medicine. For more than 2 decades, the college has sponsored this event to honor the contributions and legacy of civil rights icon Dr. William G. Anderson, a founding leader of Georgia's Albany movement from the 1960s. In addition, in 1994, Dr. Anderson was elected as the first African American to serve as national president of the American Osteopathic Association, a very noteworthy accomplishment for that time and still today. This year's event, Slavery to Freedom, an American Odyssey, focuses on the history and legacy of African Americans like Dr. Anderson in their pursuits of social justice. As you know, the history and experience of Black people in this country remains complicated, and I say that as a Black man myself. Complicated because for centuries, since our arrival in the United States in 1619 through the transatlantic slave trade, Europeans, white Americans, and others have recognized our strength, witnessed our perseverance, and acknowledged our contributions to society in ways that benefit them, which can be inherently one-sided. I applaud the College of Osteopathic Medicine for keeping the health and well-being of Black people and members of other underrepresented minority and marginalized groups top of mind. This is vitally important now, as our nation and world continue to grapple with the global health pandemic, which is ravaging our families, our friends, and communities too, all disproportionately. And as our country begins to better acknowledge and prioritize the health and well-being of all Americans, so must it address the long-standing inequities in our access to high-quality, culturally competent health care. We must also address the persistent lack of consideration for the unique needs of our community, which stem from centuries of apathy, mistreatment, and misconceptions about various things, including our discordance with treatment plans and misguided conceptions about our tolerance for pain. Today's speakers will explore how race, sex, gender identity and expression, education, employment, incarceration, religion, and many other things impact the overall health and well-being of African Americans. These broad injustices and social determinants of health must be called out. They also have to be understood and applied in our undergraduate and graduate medical education, as well as practice and research. Again, I owe my gratitude to the College of Osteopathic Medicine for its commitment to highlighting these critical issues and inviting members of our campus and local community to join the conversation. Like the college, Michigan State University aspires to provide more opportunities for institution-wide dialogue and take actions which acknowledge the past, build upon current understandings, and leverage lessons learned to help create a more just, inclusive, and holistically healthy Spartan and local community. Thank you for inviting me to join you today, and best wishes for a most enlightening, provocative, and transformative event.
It is indeed my privilege and pleasure to be bringing to you the 21st of the William G. Anderson Slavery to Freedom Lecture Series. This series emanates from a growing desire on the part of Michigan State University, its College of Osteopathic Medicine, the members of the administration, faculty, and staff, all of whom want to engage the community in addressing the many problems that yet exist in going to that ultimate position of the perfect union. Most of us have heard of the more perfect union, and yes, we all want to get there, and we're not certain how to do it. But this lecture series will bring to campus people who are actively involved in helping us to become a better place for all to live and to find that ideal that is a more perfect union. So I really appreciate that you will join us in this effort as we bring to our community people from literally all over the country, some from even foreign countries, who have taken the opportunity to share with us their experiences so that together we may find that more perfect union. Thank you for joining us in this effort.
Good evening, and welcome to night 2 of the 2021 William G. Anderson Lecture Series, Slavery to Freedom, An American Odyssey. I am Marita Gilbert, the Associate Dean for Diversity and Campus Inclusion in the Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine, and I'll be your host this evening. My extreme gratitude to Dean Amalfitano, Dr. Anderson, and Dr. Bennett for their support and for providing historical context and purpose for this series. I begin in commemoration of those who have come before us by reading the following land acknowledgement. Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. The university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We pause in this moment to honor those whose lives and labor were exploited and lost in the practice of enslavement and in struggles for freedom on the land on which we sit. We acknowledge that their presence made it possible for ours. We pause to recognize and remember all that has made it possible for us to live, learn, and work in this place. It is Black History Month, or as Dr. Monique Morris reminded us last week, Black Futures Month, as reframed by the Movement for Black Lives. Now, however you describe it, I appreciate the recognition that this moment is simultaneously a celebration of what and who has been, and what and who will be. I speak the names, honor the legacy of ancestors whose lives were dedicated to various elements of freedom movements. Ida B. Wells Barnett, someone we might now identify as an investigative journalist, reporting the nature, the number, and true causes for lynchings while leading a crusade to establish an anti-lynching law. Dorothy I. Height, whose unparalleled gift of leadership placed her on the front lines of the civil rights and women's rights movements, organizing and advocating on behalf of Black women in the US and abroad for 80 years. Hers was an ethos of grassroots organizing and providing counsel to those in the highest levels of leadership, including serving as advisor to multiple US presidents. And in the space where I sit this very moment hangs a photo of Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer at the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party State Convention. They go before me and stand with me. As I come to this role, Ella Baker reminds me to hold space for young people, create the conditions for them to lead, and they will. Freedom movements are, and necessarily must be, intergenerational. Our future depends on those in whom we invest today. Fannie Lou Hamer's undaunted determination challenges me to be relentless in dismantling systems of oppression. She reminds me to contribute to movement building right where I am, using the gifts and tools I possess. Let nothing, not long-hold systems of systemic racism, not the challenges that lay before me, not the seemingly impossible, obstruct my vision. We, all of us, inherit the legacy left for us by our ancestors who led us from slavery to freedom. Let us remember, this American Odyssey is no accident, but a result of freedom movements in our history and our future. past months, we have all been witness to a contemporary freedom movement. I am excited to discuss that with our presenter for the evening. Artist, activist, educator, public speaker, and Los Angeles native, Patrisse Cullors is co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Global Network and founder of the Los Angeles-based grassroots organization, Dignity and Power Now. For the last 20 years, Patrisse has been on the front lines of criminal justice reform and led the Reform LA Jails Yes on Our campaign, a ballot initiative that passed by a 71% landslide victory in March 2020. Patrisse co-founded the global Black Lives Matter movement in 2013 after sparking the viral Twitter hashtag. The movement has since expanded into an international organization with dozens of chapters around the world, campaigning against anti-Black racism. And I'm sure the Lansing chapter is in the house tonight. Her work for the organization was recognized and honored in Time Magazine's 2020 100 Women of the Year project. In January 2016, Patrisse published her memoirs, When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir, which became an instant New York Times bestseller. Patrisse is currently faculty director of a new social and environmental arts practice MFA program that she developed at Arizona's Prescott College. It's the first of its kind in the nation to focus a curriculum on the intersection of art, social justice, and community organizing. In honor of Patrisse's leadership, vision, and her work for Black Lives Matter, the Los Angeles City Council has declared February 2nd Patrisse Cullors Day. The MSU College of Osteopathic Medicine welcomes Patrisse Cullors. And as a special treat, we'll also be joined for this conversation by Dr. Tamora Lomax, the Foundational Associate Professor of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University, and the co-founder of the Feminist Wire, an online publication committed to feminist, anti-racist, and anti-imperialistic socio-political critique. Her hope is to bring academic expertise to the streets and vice versa. Welcome, Dr. Lomax. It is so good to be here with you both.
Hi.
Welcome to the College of Osteopathic Medicine.
Oh my goodness, this is so amazing.
So just
Wonderful.
hey. So as we said in our last reception, we can't have a big hug, but virtually big hugs to you both, and thanks for being here. So as you heard me kind of talk about as we opened, I really try to take time during the month of February, either Black History Month or Black Futures Month, to talk about, to think about, to just give gratitude for history makers and ancestors who have in some way paved the way for us, right? Yeah. And I try to speak their names because I realize that for some, access to information about Black history, although it is American history, is just not a thing, right? And so I'd like us to get started by hearing from each of you who are some of the significant history makers and ancestors who have influenced your work. And I'll start with you, Patrisse.
I'm just changing my name so people can see my full name. Oh man, I love this question. And at different points in time, I feel like there are different people who really help shape me. But I will start with Harriet Tubman, who right before I started my local organization, Dignity and Power Now, and before we started BLM, I remember having these vivid experiences with Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad and doing this deep dive research into who she was, what she stood for, how she did what she did, and realizing that similar to Jesus, and just follow me here, similar to Jesus, there was two stories being told. There was a historical Jesus and there's then the mythical Jesus. Same with Harriet. There's historical Harriet, and then there's the mythical Harriet, right? The mythical Harriet is almost as if she didn't really exist. She, freed thousands of people. She couldn't read. She had all these visions. And yet, as I started to really dig into the historical Harriet, I realized that, yes, she is magic, but she didn't free thousands of people. She freed 300. That's still profound. She couldn't read, and she did sort of live off her visions. And this powerful, how I really understood that was like Harriet using her intuition as a way to move us towards freedom. And then learning that Harriet wasn't just sort of freeing people, but she continued the fight for Black liberation in so many ways, whether it was in the Northeast or in Canada. There was this profound life of hers that was so beautiful and powerful and moving. And so she really shaped much of my last decade of my life, her visioning and who she was and what I was able to excavate around her experience. So I'll start with her, and then I'll end with Malcolm. Malcolm is a really important ancestor for me, and I think obviously deeply and profoundly misunderstood when it comes to how he's been demonized and whitewashed. And I think a lot of that has to do with him obviously being a Muslim, obviously being unapologetic, and how he talked about the fight and protection of Black people. But what I did a piece on Malcolm, a performance piece on Malcolm, and in my research of him really recognized that Malcolm at the end of the day left the nation because he was protecting Black women. He left the nation because he was challenging child sexual abuse and spoke out against it. This was in a time where people didn't care about Black women, and definitely not Black girls. And I think, that's a story we don't tell about Malcolm. That's a story that we've lost about Malcolm. And so those two ancestors are really critical for my work.
Dr. Lomax, could you quickly share some of your ancestors?
Yeah, I had to take a note for a second because my sister Patrisse just took us to school right there. I'd never thought about Malcolm in that way. So yes. And then so I'm going to get to the ancestors, but I just want to appreciate all of our patterns that we have going on right now. It's just beautiful and amazing. Okay. So, so many, right? Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman is mine, Fannie Lou Hamer. So I have my activists, then I have my Black feminists. And so Toni Cade, Bambara, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, these are the people I bring with me every day. But the person who literally makes my heart sing, like I can't get enough of her, is Ella Baker, the Fundi, the great facilitator, the mentor. We need to retell her story, in terms of the mentorship that she gave to King, to the SCLC, to SNCC. And, that's not how they told the story, but it is very clear that she was the mentor. She was the one, she was the teacher. And so her humility, her knowledge, her sense of self, the power of her voice, her militancy over respectability, her notion around participatory democracy. When I say she makes my heart sing, I mean, she gets me excited. I call my nieces baby Ellas. I make sure they watch Fundi. Like, I want everybody to know about this giant because she was so amazing. Like, to me, she is the future. She lets us know what's possible and who we can be regardless, in spite of, no matter how, she called out the sexism, she dealt with it, she stomped it in the face. I mean, and folks historically for so long ignored her. So she, is like for me, just this, she is this powerful giant that I just take with me everywhere I go. But in my work, I try to speak about her as much as I can.
So, Dr. Lomax, I believe you have the next question for us.
I do. Okay. So it is so good to see you today. I'm so excited to be here with you today and ask this first question. So, Black historians say the movement exists on a continuum.
Yes.
Which it does, right? But some Black BLM activists years ago have been quoted as saying, you know, this is not your mother's or your grandmother's movement, as a way to draw distinctions between BLM and previous movements.
Yes.
Right? But this summer, we saw where many folks of those same folks were saying, wait a minute, this is not a new movement, it's a part of the continuum. So we know that it's a continuum, but I want to get your thoughts on this idea that it's not your mother's movement, right? Yeah. So this is a multi-part question. I want to get your thoughts on that, but I also want you to talk about the evolution of the movement. Yes. And then, are there distinctions in the movement in these periods of time?
Absolutely. So it isn't your grandmother's civil rights movement. It's a different, it wears a different face, but it's a part of the legacy of our grandmother's civil rights movement. And, you know, I believe it was Tef Poe who actually was the person that said, this isn't your grandmother's civil rights movement. And it was really in response to this idea that the legacy civil rights orgs and the people who led them were going to take us towards freedom during Ferguson. This really came out of the Ferguson uprising and the people of St. Louis and Ferguson staking claim to how they believed they should be able to uprise. No, we're not going to pull our pants up. No, we're not going to take our gold grills out. No, we're not going to stop cursing. No, we're not going to wear suits. This is a very different, we're going to support all Black lives. There's not going to be a perfect victim. And so this becomes a departure from largely the MLK civil rights movement, right? That was, it was a tactic to button up, to, you know, for the women to wear skirts and blouses and for the men to wear suits. This was a tactic around challenging how the white gaze saw Black people. So I think it was actually a really necessary tactic, a really important tactic. It was about when the news media was going to show, you know, a bunch of Black, well-dressed Black people being targeted by a white mob, that Black people can be like, and even when we are dressed like this, even when we are suited and booted in your style, and what you all see as respectable, we are still being knocked down. I think that kind of tactic, though, made an assumption that this new movement was going to also use that tactic. And this movement decided, no, we're gonna have our tattoos and our piercings, we're gonna be queer and trans, and we're not gonna hide it. We're going to be our full selves and remind Black people, and especially legacy Black orgs, that this is who we are, and we're unapologetic, and we're going to keep fighting on behalf of all Black lives. So I think that departure was really about challenging the notion of how we're supposed to fight. And this moment and this iteration of this movement, especially with the uprisings around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I believe that because our movement has grown, both in size, but also in maturity, we have become more politically mature, that we also recognize deeply that we come from multiple movements. Yes, the civil rights movement, but we also come from the Black Power movement. We come from two legacies that were sometimes in contradiction with each other, but often sometimes worked alongside each other. And we are taking from both those movements that saw themselves, especially the Black Power movement, as part of a global Black family, challenging white supremacy and fighting for Black power. We see ourselves as part of that. And the evolution of this movement, I believe really does come to fold around how we've turned, you remember where we come from, Dr. Lomax. We come from scrappy, not institutionalized whatsoever, young organizers trying to make sense of what was happening and how we move the country and the globe forward around fighting anti-Black racism. But somewhere in between, in these last 8 years, we recognized that we wanted to sustain ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so unlike an Occupy movement, where that was a moment in time, we didn't want to be a moment in time. And part of sustaining yourself is building institutions, strong institutions that are founded in the principles of Black Lives Matter, that can help push and challenge white supremacist institutions. We knew that we couldn't just be a scrappy bunch, which was amazing, our scrappy was powerful, but that we needed to organize and we needed to institutionalize. Mm-hmm. And with that comes a whole other set of complications, but also comes with a significant amount of power, and which we saw was used to get a fascist out of office in November.
Well, that's the word. Listen, we could have stayed there for a minute, but I have to ask you, I'll share with you this summer, as an associate dean in a medical college, it was striking to me to witness the thousands and thousands who took to the street day after day, right? Especially in light of the fact that there was a novel coronavirus that was wreaking havoc across the globe, right? So often when I talk about that, I speak about it in terms of or I describe it as a twindemic, right? This idea that we have COVID-19, so this virus that's infecting our physical body, and then systemic racism, this virus infecting the body politic, right? Both with disparate implications for Black and Brown folks. And that can be related to the economy or health, education, politics, certainly our culture, right? Just think about the ways in which we've reframed the word essential, right? That's right. Whose work is essential, whose health is essential, right? Even down to the perceived threat that is ascribed to certain bodies and the ways in which that's a justification for their surveillance and to criminalize them, their actual bodies in space. And so as I think of the name of this series, right, much of what I'm referencing here is the result of our journey from slavery to freedom. Yes. I know, Patrisse, this is something that you have long been concerned about. My question for you is this. So what is the effect of the global pandemic had on the movement for Black lives as a freedom movement?
Mm-hmm. A profound effect. More than anything, though, I will say that this moment, this last year, has just exposed everything that we have been talking about for decades. That capitalism doesn't work. That racism doesn't work. That patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, and all the ways that our institutions have relied on those entities, those things do not work. And so what has been amazing for me to witness, especially in those first months of the pandemic, was the mutual aid programming that was accelerated in this moment, recognizing that we live in a country that literally does not care for the people in it, that it is survival of the fittest. And so people came together in the most profound ways, both at the beginning of the pandemic, but also this summer. People risked their lives to protest on behalf of Black life. So the exposure of this moment has been really amazing. An exposure that I don't know we would have seen without this kind of pandemic. Mm. There's also been another set of ways in which this pandemic, the twin pandemics, have impacted our movement, which is a reassessment and an acceleration of demands that we've been calling on for years, such as reparations, such as abolition. These demands that we've been calling on for years and telling the world, universal healthcare, that if we don't get these things in place, more people will die. We all understand at this point that there is no reason why 450,000 people died. That was unacceptable. That is unacceptable. And so if we, as a country and as a nation, want to transform these conditions that we're currently living in, we have to change the system. The system does not work. There's a chant that came out of the Ferguson protests, which is the whole damn system is guilty as hell. And so that has been on stage for this last year. That's been on stage, and our work has only been justified, in this moment. And I want to shout out the work of Black Lives Matter Michigan, who is leading on pushing forward the first omnibus bill that comes out of the movement for Black Lives called the Breathe Act. I know our sister Angela Waters is pushing for the mayor of Lansing to really move on the Breathe Act at the local level, but also move on the Breathe Act at the state level. And the Breathe Act is truly a resource-filled act. It's actually challenging elected officials to reinvest into Black communities, Black poor communities in particular, and to realize that the only investment that we have seen in the last 30 years is an investment around punishment, around an economy of punishment, and that what we are calling forth with the Breathe Act as an economy of care, where we actually believe in the dignity of human beings, Black human beings in particular.
So the next question you sort of referenced when you spoke about Malcolm X in the beginning. So Black women movement workers from Sojourner Truth to Ella Baker to the Combahee River Collective and beyond have complained about the erasure of Black women in femmes in both organizing and in our collective analysis of the Black condition. So in 1984, Audre Lorde does this interview with James Baldwin titled Revolutionary Hope. And she says, whereas Black men are America's nightmare, Black women are the blank, meaning we're not even considered on nightmare status. In your estimation, what needs to happen to shift this overarching narrative, and particularly right beyond hashtags?
So many things need to shift. I just want to shout out the work of Dr. Lomax, where as the Feminist Wire was one of the first publications to lift up the 3 Black women who started Black Lives Matter to begin with. So many people were confused. What patriarchy and sexism does is it makes you confused about Black women's leadership and what we're able to accomplish. People didn't believe that it was Black women who started Black Lives Matter. People didn't believe that we could create something so big. In fact, the first messaging we received was that blank. Nobody talked about us. We would see our names on the news. We would see the name Black Lives Matter in the news with no context that it came from people. But then the next thing was like, okay, well, if these Black women started, then there must have been someone behind them. So that must have been George Soros. They must be the puppet of George Soros. And then you start to see the minimizing. Okay, fine. It was Black women that started it. Wait, they're queer? Okay, then they must have a gay agenda, right? Oh, they hate Black men. And so all of these excuses about a powerful movement, that those excuses would not exist if it were 3 Black men that started this movement. They would not exist. And in fact, when Alicia, Opa, and I started Black Lives Matter in 2013, we did not call ourselves founders. It wasn't in us to think about ourselves as 3 people who started something. We wanted to gift BLM to our movement. We wanted people to decentralize the movement, to use it as part of your organizing. The best organizing is decentralized organizing. So for a whole year, we didn't make the op-eds or think pieces proclaiming who we were. We did the work that Black women always do every single day without that visibility. But then, as the popularity rose of Black Lives Matter, ours did not. It did not match what Black Lives Matter received. What Black Lives Matter received did not match what we received. And it was really Black women who lifted us up. It was older Black women in particular, just a generation above us, who said, we're not gonna allow the erasure to happen the way it happened to them and to the women before them. And they challenged not just the people inside our movement, but mainstream media. Stop talking about Black Lives Matter without talking about the women who started it. And so our work is to keep telling the story. I swear to you, I've been telling the story of Black Lives Matter for 7.5 years. The same story over and over again. And I promise you, every time I tell a story, someone's like, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that it was 3 Black women. After all of these years, it's our job to tell the story. It's our job. It's why Black feminism and the work of Black feminism is so critical to challenging the ways in which we understand history. And that, you know, as Dr. Lomax spoke about earlier, Ella Baker, there should be no reason why we don't know the architect of the civil rights movement. And yet the only reason why we don't know the architect is because of patriarchy. She single-handedly created an infrastructure so that there can be a king, so that there can be a John Lewis. And yet she is pushed under the rug. It is only because of the work of Black feminists that we know about the legacy of Ella Baker. And so it should not be the onus on Black women to tell Black women's stories. It should be on all of us. So every single one of us should approach the stories of Black women and our leadership as a story that all of us should be telling to our children, to their children, and to their children's children.
So I know we're going to have Dr. Lomax ask our last question. I know our time together got really short before we open it up, but let me just say, I am so thankful that you lifted up Dr. Lomax, because even, so I told her that we were best friends in my head. She's my Black feminist translator, right? But the work that she has been doing with the Feminist Wire, right, was also the space where it didn't have to be academic conversations, right? And she was telling the stories, helping us to know, and helping and even pushing me, right? So she and I have been back and forth in digital spaces and social media before we ever got to see each other in person, and really pushing me to think about my own role in the work, what that should look like, forcing me to ask the next big question. And so as much as we took time to honor our ancestors, I want to honor both of you as my walking ancestors and sisters for filling that space, right? Helping us to tell those stories, helping us, right, to continue that journey from slavery to freedom. So before I turn it over to Dr. Lomax, I do want to say that our question and answer box is open. I am starting to collect some of those questions, and I will read them. So please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A. Dr. Lomax will have our last question before we go to our participants.
Well, thank you both for that. Just, wow, I really appreciate that. You know, the statement, the overriding statement for the Feminist Wire is to tell the other side of the story that's not being told, the story that white supremacy won't tell. So I really appreciate that. This question that I have, Patrisse, should let you know how powerful your words are, and even those moments that are just like, you know, minor moments to you are big moments to us. So I'm really excited to ask this, because it's a big question, but it has to do with an interaction we had years ago. All right, so I'm not sure if you remember, but we had this talk years ago at the University of Arizona, when the Feminist Wire partnered with the university to hold the first Black Lives Matter university conference. Prior to the conference, university and colleges were not paying attention to Black Lives Matter. They were acting like, you know, it was not happening. And so This was our way of bringing it to the college with resources and saying, look, universities, pay attention to this. You were there amongst others. And in passing, we were talking and you said, sis, this is awesome, but it is still too academic. That has stuck with me. And so my question to you has been for all of these years, I think that was like 2015. I'm not sure, but after that, all of these colleges and universities started doing Black Lives Matter stuff. And I always wonder, are we doing the work that's necessary? And this is so important for me as someone, along with Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown, we're building a department for African American and African Studies. And it is very important to me, to both of us, that we do this work right. Social justice is central to our work, which is a very different model for academia, for departments in particular. So my question to you is, in your estimation, what are colleges and universities lacking in their attempts at movement work? What is needed, or what would you like to see?
Oh, I imagine that I said that to you.
You said it was good though, but.
Thank you. And thank you for creating that space where I could share that feedback with you all those years ago. I think there's a great gap with academia and our Black freedom movements. And I think that gap has honestly less to do with Black people and more to do with being a part of a mostly white institution that doesn't center Black liberation and Black freedom. What I believe that institutions can do in this moment, especially institutions that say they care about Black Lives Matter, I'm always grateful and honored to show up and speak to universities. I love it when we can be in person. Glad Michigan State is being safe and not gathering. But it's the time where I get to speak and talk, especially to young people, young Black folks in particular, about how they're thinking about their lives and organizing and social justice. But while we're here, just months after getting rid of a fascist out of office, and just a month after white supremacist terrorists, mobilizing against the Capitol, there's so much more to do. There's so much more that we should be doing. And I believe that what an institution can do is partner with the Black freedom orgs that are leading work in your towns, in your state, in your city. For Michigan State, you could partner directly with the Black Lives Matter Michigan chapter and figure out how you can support the Breathe Act at the local level. That will go a long way to have the support of an institution for our first omnibus bill, to use the brilliant Black researchers and the labs that you all have to help support that work and further that work. There's so much resource in academia. It's resource rich, but it often doesn't go back into Black communities. And so that's something that I'm consistently trying to push universities to consider and to figure out how to pair, and not how to tell Black freedom movements what to do, but how to authentically collaborate and pair up with the already brilliant work that's happening on the ground.
So you've spoken to this a little bit, so you may not have to go as much in depth. One of our med students wrote, do you think the spirit of the BLM movement is the same as previous movements in terms of demanding the recognition and the humanity and value of our lives?
Can you ask that one more time?
Sure. Do you think the spirit of the BLM movement is the same as previous movements in terms of demanding the recognition of the humanity and value of our lives?
It's always interesting because I was thinking about the civil rights movement versus the Black Power movement and what each movement was trying to consider. MLK and the work of SCLC in particular, alongside SNCC and so many other brilliant organizations, were really trying to change the minds of white people. Mm-hmm. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but that was a big focus, right? How do we change these white people's minds to see us as human beings so that we can have equality. And I think, compared to the Black Power movement, which is trying to get Black people to see ourselves and to determine our destinies and decide how we understood what our humanity is and what our power was. And I think, our movement is trying to do a blend of both, without selling out how we understand what Black self-determination is. We know that the way in which this country is constructed is to not see Black people as human beings, is to not see our value and our worth. It takes a lot to convince somebody. Think about relationships you've been in, trying to convince somebody of your value and your worth. That's a lot of energy. Instead of trying to figure out, well, how do I understand my value? And how do I understand my worth? I believe when Black people in particular, when we come together and understand our value and our worth, and we are at the center of the conversation, we see ourselves first versus the white gaze, then other people around us start to see our value and our worth. It takes much more work to try to convince other human beings to value us than trying to convince ourselves. And so I think that, we have to learn from other movements. It's very important that we try not to make the same mistakes. It's very important that we also take the really good stuff that our movements did from the past. And I think that after 7.5 years, going from being called a terrorist organization to now possibly receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, we have shifted the culture on how largely Black Lives Matter is seen. Doesn't mean that we don't get the same death threats every single day. It just means that that our voice is no longer marginal in the same ways that it was. And that then allows people to see us for who we truly are.
Mm-hmm. There are some who have pushed back against the BLM movement by saying the infamous "All Lives Matter." I would love to hear your thoughts about this and if it undermines the BLM movement and the importance on Black lives and not just all lives.
Yeah, I mean, this question I've been getting since the very, very beginning, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure for those of us who are close to BLM, either inside of it or adjacent to it, we've been getting this question for years. I don't really answer that question anymore, but I will answer it. I just want you to know where my state of mind is,
Mm-hmm.
because at this point, you don't understand what the term is and what we're trying to do, then you're willfully being ignorant. And I personally was trained to find the people who want to be found versus trying to convince the people who want to stay in their ignorant place. But here's a very simple response to this very simple understanding, which is, yes, all lives matter. Duh, that is the premise of Black Lives Matter. We know that all lives matter. We want so desperately for all lives to matter. And in this point in history, it is not true. All lives do not matter. And we know that. We know that, and we see that every single day, from the institutions that exist that we are in, to the ways in which white supremacists have been galvanized over the last 4 years. And until Black Lives Matter, all lives will not matter.
So I'm trying to group questions that are by themes, right? What advice would you give to those who are younger or newer activists looking to make a difference for Black futures?
Oh, I always feel funny giving advice. Because I like take it or leave it, sure. Like I'll share my experiences with you, but advice that's reaching for me. I'm still living in an experience, so I'm still trying to figure things out. But I will say this, I've now been in this work since I was 16 years old, which literally feels like a lifetime ago, and I'm not that old. And I know that in another 20 years, I'm gonna be like, what, 16 years old? But when I remember telling one of my mentors, when I when I first joined the civil rights movement, I was like, I am so excited. And this is, this is when it was not cool to be a part of the civil rights movement. Imagine none of my friends were like, why are you taking us to a protest? Like, why are you dragging us to the anti-war protest? Why are you in this community meeting? I don't understand. Everybody's much older than us. But I was so excited about finally hearing that people were challenging a system that I grew up in that had nearly decimated my family, that I could have the strength and the will to fight that system back. I was so profoundly engaged with that idea. And what I didn't realize is that these fights that we're in are lifelong, which means that the work is the long haul. This is long haul work. This isn't work you do for a couple years and then you sit it down. This is work that you commit yourself to. And when you commit yourself to something, it means that you need to have some tools, right? One of those tools is taking care of yourself and the people around you. This work is taxing for so many reasons, but it's taxing on the spirit, it's taxing on the heart, it's taxing on your emotions. And so see this as work that should be alongside other things that you do. Do not make this your center only. For a long time, movement work was all I did. And while I love that it was all I did, it did really impact my physical health in particular. And it impacted my relationships and my friendships. I couldn't have a conversation without talking about the movement. And it really impacted my ability to access my joy and my pleasure and my laughter. And so I've really shifted how I understand my movement work. I've also shifted how I understand what the work is. Laughter and joy and pleasure is also the work, because I am a human being. I deserve all of those things. Our life shouldn't just be what we fight against and what we fight for. Our life should also be how we thrive and how we live in that. And so, in these last few years, as I've been reacclimating myself to thriving, it's hard. I feel guilty. I feel guilty for resting. I feel guilty for not working. And that is something that I want young people to learn very early on, that you don't have to work 24 hours a day in order to do good work. You don't have to damn near kill yourself in order to do good work. You don't have to sacrifice your body to do good work. We should not be martyrs for this movement. This movement should be life-giving for us and the people around us. And that is something that I am continuing to learn every single day.
I was asked if you could provide more explanation on the term white gaze, and perhaps we as a medical school should be mindful of this in our curriculum and communications.
There's two questions here. So the white gaze question, and then the second question,
which is how we can be mindful of the white gaze, especially in medical school, and how we're developing and implementing a medical education curriculum.
Yeah. Oh man, I wish it wasn't time. There's so much to say here. I'm actually start with the other question, okay, which is, the medical industrial complex was literally built off of white supremacy and experimenting on Black people's bodies, especially Black women. And so there's a lot of reckoning that the medical industry actually needs to do that I don't feel like it has truly done. As someone who's done a lot of work around Black maternal mortality and morbidity, Black women dying during birth or after birth, this has been a big conversation that I've been having around how do we challenge the white gaze inside of medical institutions in particular. Mm-hmm. And the white gaze is simply about how we understand how we're viewed through whiteness, and how we're understood through whiteness versus how we understand ourselves as Black people. And, I think with how white folks in particular can undo the white gaze in medical institutions is a couple of things. we need more Black people to be healthcare practitioners. This is different than we need more Black people to be cops. Let me just tell you that. We need more Black people to be healthcare practitioners because the data has shown us that Black people treat Black people better when they are serving Black people inside of healthcare institutions. There needs to be a reckoning inside the medical industry around how it has, for centuries, decimated Black bodies and humiliated Black bodies and used and exploited Black bodies. And that, to me, is a much longer conversation, and a conversation that the medical industry and medical schools should be talking about. You should be teaching about Henrietta Lacks and what that, and how her body was used as a part of exploiting her and her family. We should be teaching about all the ways in which early OBGYN was practiced on Black women, especially Black women and Black enslaved women. And then after that, Black and brown women inside of jail and prison institutions. So we should be having a fuller conversation about how that has looked. And I think I'm a big fan of starting with the conversation as the first place of reckoning.
So I see that we are at our time with you. I'm gonna ask a couple things of the two of you. If you wouldn't mind looking in the Q&A box, Dr. Lomax, there are folks asking if you would connect with them who are doctoral students. So if you want to read through some of those, and then Ms. Cullors, other questions that we just didn't have time for, but questions I think that are maybe near and dear to your own heart. And then young folks who just kind of want those moments of encouragement. I think what tonight has shown me is just that moment of being seen. As I read through the comments, the things that people were saying, just thanks for doing this, thanks for having this moment, the three of us. It was important to me, Patrisse, that you know, particularly this year while we're virtual, that we have some conversational time, right? Not necessarily lecturing at folks, but really us coming together to have some conversational, pointed, critical dialogue, and just getting to the root of things. I thank you both for helping us to do that. This is an abundance of riches this evening. I am just so thankful to be with you. I will say to you, Patrisse, that the College of Osteopathic Medicine is not alone in wanting to celebrate you, but our representative, Julie Brixey of the 69th House District would like to honor you as well. Representative Brixey.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And Ms. Cullors, thank you so much for coming and giving our entire community such a wonderful glimpse at the incredible advocacy you do and that you have done throughout your life. So normally I would come onto the stage and bring you this tribute. We do these special legislative tributes, and it's really my honor and privilege to be able to present this to you on behalf of the 101st Michigan Legislature. So since we don't have a ton of time, and we have mailed a copy of it to you, I don't know if you've received it yet, but since we don't have a ton of time, I'll just go through the highlights. And it's an honorary tribute in special recognition of Patrisse Cullors. Let it be known that it is with the utmost respect and admiration that we honor you, Patrisse Cullors, for your dedication and commitment to addressing racial discrimination and for your leadership in the civil rights movement. Ms. Cullors is an inspiring individual who has touched so many lives through the countless hours and nearly lifelong dedication to civil rights advocacy. It's such a privilege to have her here as a speaker for this year's Dr. Anderson Lecture Series. Her activism and advocacy, especially the civil rights advocacy, including the BLM movement, has had an amazing positive impact on lives. Her early foray into activism as a teenager with the Bus Riders Union awards as young as age 22 when she received the Mario Savio Young Activist Award. So many awards and accolades, including the Los Angeles City Council honoring her work for the Black Lives Matter movement by declaring a Patrisse Cullors Day. So in special tribute, therefore, we dedicate the special recognition of you, because your incredible achievements in leadership and commitment to social justice have had such an indelible impact, not just on our state, but on our nation. And we thank you for your commitment and dedication, and hope that your efforts long continue to inspire others. So thank you so much on behalf of the state of Michigan.
Thank you so much.
So some final thoughts. So Claire VL asked me a question about resources. Can you please email me so I can send you the list of those? Before we part, there are just so many people to thank. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. This has been a blast. I hope you all had as much fun as we did. I want to thank Dr. Andrea Malfitano. I want to thank, of course, Dr. Anderson, for whom this series is named. And then thank you so, so much to Barbara Breedlove, who is always working to make sure that this series is a success. She's even working right now, texting and getting folks connected via email. So just to make sure that this series goes off without a hitch. I look forward to seeing all of you in 2 weeks when we sit down with Dr. Cornell West. Until then, please be warm, please be safe. As my friend Kirby Gibson says, wash your hands, hydrate, and moisturize throughout this winter. Thank you all so, so much, and I will see you soon. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. This was beautiful.